You can't open a newspaper right now without reading a headline about the US and China chip war. My name is Andrew Bustamante. I'm a former covert CIA intelligence officer, and I'm here to explain what's really happening with the chip war between China and the United States. Now, first of all, you need to understand this conflict is not about technology. No matter how much you read about microprocessors and semiconductors, what's really happening here is a conflict based on economics. Now, what happened in 2018 was that then President Donald Trump signed into effect new tariffs equaling about $34 billion against Chinese imports to the United States. Now, the vast majority of those tariffs were actually targeting Chinese technology. Not long after Trump put in motion the $34 billion tariff against China, and China responded with the same tariff, we then saw President Trump sign into motion a brand new executive order, something unprecedented and different from any president before him. He signed Executive Order 13959, which essentially said that it was illegal through presidential decree for American companies to invest in any Chinese technology company that had an affiliation or a connection to the Chinese military, the Chinese intelligence infrastructure, or the Chinese government. Now, this meant that in addition to blocking imports from China, we were now also blocking the export of investment financial capital into China. And China really had a problem with this. Now, the real secret sauce, the thing that nobody talks about that was driving President Trump to make these decisions in 2018 and 2019 was something called the Made in China Plan, or the China 2025 Plan. In May of 2015, 3 years before all of the trade war conflict started, China made an announcement and set in motion its 2025 plan, which was an economic plan designed to help China divest itself from its supply chain reliance on the West and Western high technology. Now, in that plan set in motion in 2015, China made the goal to become self-sufficient on internal or Chinese technology by 2025. What that meant is that China was trying to have 70% self-sufficiency in terms of all high-tech devices, all high-tech equipment, microprocessors, memory chips, etc. by 2025. The reason it wanted that self-sufficiency was because it knew it had a major supply chain reliance on the West. How significant is that reliance? The United States accounts for more than 40% of all global high-tech exports in the world. When you combine the United States with Japan, that global dominance turns into a 75% market share. 75% of all high-tech equipment, from microchips to medical equipment to the stuff that goes into your car, all of it is produced between the Japanese and the Americans. The remaining 25% is controlled by Taiwan and South Korea. So essentially, you have 100% of the export market is controlled by 4 Western allies: Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and the United States. So when you're an aspiring power like China, you see a major supply chain issue here, because China will never be able to compete with any of those 4 countries if they're always reliant on their technology. So that's what has been driving China since before 2015 to develop and become self-sufficient in its own technology right. The 2015 announcement of a 2025 plan to become 70% self-sufficient was just the next logical step. When President Trump saw the long-term impact of a self-sufficient China, not just against national security, but in terms of American economic impact. If we lose our ability to service the Chinese market for their high technology needs, it's going to massively impact the American GDP. So that's why he set in motion his own trade war, and what started the entire US-China chip war. By 2019, there was a sliver of hope that the US and that the Chinese might meet some kind of accord. However, what happened right then? COVID. And with COVID, and of course with President Trump's calling COVID the China virus, you can see how diplomatic channels started to break down after that. Either way, when President Trump left office in 2020, one of the few policies that President Biden adopted from the Trump administration, again, don't tell anyone this happened, was Executive Order 13959. And President Biden went on to expand that executive order with his own Executive Order 13974 that actually went beyond Trump's original goals of further impacting, influencing, and restricting the trade of Chinese technology and the investment in Chinese firms. So here you have such a massive economic priority to the United States that both the Trump administration and the Biden administration agree to continue to put pressure on the Chinese to restrict their ability to become self-sufficient in high technology. And one of those core elements in that high technology is chips. Now, what are these chips that we're talking about? There's memory chips, and then there's microprocessors. Now, your microprocessors are the big chips that you usually think of when you think about semiconductors and microchips, right? Those microprocessors are the things that do all the heavy lifting and everything from your smartphone to your laptop to your connected devices, everything. That is your microprocessor. But your memory chip is something very different. It's all about storing data and storing information. When you hear about Taiwan, it's because about 95% of all microprocessors are created by Taiwanese, like manufactured in Taiwan. Now, the design and IP for those microprocessors largely come from the United States and Japan. So the ownership of the company is in Japan and the United States, but the actual manufacturing base is in Taiwan. Now, contrary to that, you have the memory chips, and those memory chips are largely actually created in the United States and in South Korea. So the United States really does have a manufacturing capability for semiconductors and for microchips, but they're limited to those storage devices in those memory chips specifically, which is why just last year it was such a big deal when China put a ban on the United States, preventing any Chinese consumers from buying memory chips that came from the United States. Not only did that ban restrict Chinese and American trade and really upset the American government, but it also put pressure on America's ally, South Korea, because guess where China wanted to expand their memory chip operations? With the South Koreans. And then of course, the United States asked the South Koreans not to do so. So now South Korea has found itself in this pinch where it knows that if it expands operations, it will make more money and have more business with the Chinese. But in doing so, it will actually distance itself and upset its friends in Washington. This is exactly the heart of the economic conflict that is the chip war. It is not a technology conflict. It is an economic conflict, because what China is trying to do is create some self-sufficiency on its own so that it can compete with the United States in the future as a high-tech development and manufacturing competitor. The United States doesn't want that. Right now, the United States has so much control of the global technology market that it has nearly a monopoly. And where it doesn't have control, it has close allies who are dependent on the United States in some other way. China, on the other hand, is standing alone. And most of the Chinese allies out there are actually dependent on China for their technological needs. So you can see that what China is trying to do is mimic the success of the US economy by divesting itself away from more traditional manufacturing and more into the space of high technology. The United States, on the other hand, knows that if China is successful in doing so, then the Chinese will be even that much more of a threat to America. A threat because of their growing military, but also a threat because of their growing economy and their self-sufficiency in terms of high-tech conflict. So what does this mean to you and me? First of all, whether you're an investor wondering where best to invest your money, or if you're a technology firm or a technology leader wondering who's going to win out in the chip war, or even if you're just a normal everyday person a little bit worried about what the cost is going to look like for a smartphone or a computer in the future, all of your concerns are very valid, and they're all tied to the next step in this China-US chip war. The chip war is important to understand because it's not going to go away anytime soon. If it was truly just a trade war, then it would be a matter of two different countries sending delegations to sit together and agree to new trading terms. That's not what's going to happen here. What's happening here is much more impactful because this is the United States using an American strategy that's worked since World War II, essentially to repress foreign governments by making them dependent on American technology. That has worked in parts of Europe, it's worked across Southeast Asia, but now China is realizing that in order to liberate itself and give itself the headroom it wants to become a global power competitor, it needs to separate itself from the United States. So it's trying to do that through self-sufficiency. It's also trying to do that through the theft of intellectual property and through espionage and other ways, but they are also trying to create their own legitimate, indigenous, high technology supply chain. No matter what you read in the future or see on TV, I want you to understand what the crux of this chip war is and what the long-term impact is going to be, not just to you and I, but to our businesses, to our families, and to all the technology that we use. But most importantly, I want you to understand what happens next, because in the last week, we've had two major changes to the chip war. First, you saw China rapidly expand the reach of its espionage laws. Basically, China's made it so that any corporation or individual that they see as a risk to economics or national security can be tried under espionage laws by China. Now, at the same time, when the US saw the Chinese expand their laws, they actually upgraded the threat level of China to American tourists and American travelers from level 2 to level 3. The US State Department basically has 4 levels of threat for any American traveling abroad. The highest level, or the 4th level, says do not travel, where the lowest level says travel is safe. China now sits at level 3. So now we have American businesses not able to invest in China, Americans encouraged not to go to China, and American businesses encouraged not to travel to China either. The escalation of this conflict has been staggering. From the initial 2018 trade war that Trump put in motion, to the recent release of the US CHIP Act by President Biden, and even the cooperation between the European Union and the US to block any kind of export of high technology from Europe or the United States into China, things keep getting worse. But as wild as the first half of this conflict has been, I'm really excited to share with you what the next phase will include. Because the people who understand the next phase of this chip war will be one step ahead of everybody. Not just in terms of what you read in the headlines, but in terms of your investments, your business decisions, and your own purchasing power. Understanding the next phase of this conflict is going to be even more valuable. Whether you're a CEO making business decisions, whether you're a business owner choosing how best to prosecute your technology in the future, or whether you're an everyday consumer just looking to maximize your purchase power. So stick around for my next video where I break down what's happening next and where the conflict is going.